Out is a half-hour series focusing on the LGBTQ community in Brandon, Manitoba, funded by the Community Radio Fund of Canada. The series shares the difficulties LGBTQ members have faced, the achievements and strides they have taken, and the support received from the community. We hope the stories shared will help those uncomfortable with any LGBTQ lifestyles understand the opposite point of view and become more sensitive to the struggles they face, as well as provide support and information for any LGBTQ members in the area.
Hi, my name is Janek, your host of this episode of Out, and I am indeed very proud to help bring to you this series dedicated to the LGBTQ community in Westman. In the previous episode, we had begun our conversation with Jason Fiedler, coordinator for LGBTQ programming at the Sexual Education Resource Center here in Brandon, Manitoba. We started by talking generally about CERC programming and began to get into the information that CERC provides for presentations and workshops around the region. We discussed what LGBTQ meant, but if you need to hear it again, that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, two-spirit, and queer and questioning. The evolving nature of language reflects our ability to process changing societal attitudes towards sexual orientation and the natural variations of sex and sexual expression, with values of respect and inclusion to guide us along the way. Societal attitudes towards LGBTQ people are changing, but for many it is a painfully slow process. There is so much to deal with that at times it seems impossible. The heteronormative paradigm is just so institutionalized. So how does society change? For many, visibility is key to changing public perception. For the brave people who have come out have allowed conversations to occur, and these sometimes painful conversations have allowed for a greater understanding of LGBTQ lives. Coming out allows the heterosexual public to see us for who we are, just like them having our own unique challenges and gifts. Being visible gives us a human face, one that we recognize in ourselves and in others. Personally knowing someone who is LGBTQ greatly improves the chances of that person supporting issues important to LGBTQ people. So what does being visible mean? Coming out is probably what most people think of, but one can be out and still not be visible. As an artist myself, I have found expression to be something I can freely partake in, and that itself is a certain privilege, being able to reinvent myself to better navigate a certain situation. But as a white, passing, or perhaps straight-acting cis male, my visibility is something I can often choose to present. This is a choice not available to people of color, for example, nor to many non-binary or non-gender conforming people. Feminine expressing men, masculine expressing women, and trans people can find this kind of visibility dangerous because of violent homophobic, transphobic, or femphobic behavior. In this respect, being out and visible becomes a political choice for me. I could blend in and in effect not exist in the eyes of the world. My reality becomes unheard of, unspoken, ultimately taboo, prohibited, and perhaps persecuted. My choice to be out and visible is based not only on the sense of authenticity that I can provide for myself and the psychological relief of being able to be myself, but in also knowing that I am an identity along with another group of people that if kept hidden, then we could risk the negative consequences of erasure. Saying all this, coming out is not easy, and some people I know will probably never come out. We worry with reason for our family, our jobs and security, and for our very lives. You don't stop coming out. Coming out is a lifelong job. Almost everyone you meet you will subconsciously or consciously appraise at some point. How would they react if they found out that you were LGBTQ? In this episode, we continue our conversation with Jason from CERC, who is able to discuss with some insight the difficulties of coming out, and I'm so grateful to have their careful considerations on this subject. Jason also talks to us about allies and allyship. How do we express our support for LGBTQ people?
Yeah, so talking about sex, gender identity, and sexual attraction, it's important to note all three of those things are separate. So no matter what body you're born in, you can have any gender identity and you can be attracted to any different kinds of people with any different identities. And then expression for all of those is how you share that and communicate that to the world. So particularly gender expression, because sexual expression, people can probably figure out different ways that works, like kissing, hugging, sexual relations. But gender identity, that goes back to, like clothes we talked about, how do you express yourself? For some people, clothes are an important part of expressing their identity. For other people, clothes are just clothes. The way people talk can be an expression of gender identity. How we refer to ourselves, we talked about pronouns earlier. That's an expression. Telling someone, oh, my pronoun is he, or my pronoun is they, or my pronoun is z. That's expressing who you are. Also honorifics, so that's Mr. or Mrs. Mixter would be a gender inclusive one or gender neutral one. What honorific do you put on your business card? That can express your gender. And for some people, it could be the hobbies they have or the job they have. So many things can express gender. And I also, when I talk about gender expression, I like to talk about how people read you, because you can't always control that either. And people coming from a different cultural lens, kind of how we talked about gender before, might read you differently than how you feel you're expressing yourself. An example I'll use a lot is people are familiar with the term tomboy, which usually means like a young woman that is interested in more masculine things. So gender identity might be a woman, but the expression might be more masculine. It might be shorter hair. It might be more masculine clothing. It might be more rough and tumble kind of sports or things we would consider masculine. So outside, we'll call that person a tomboy. They might have a sense of being a woman. They might express themselves more masculine, but someone might read them as a boy, right? Or that masculine presentation. Or they might look at secondary sex characteristics and say, well, I see this kind of masculine clothing, however, I read this person as female, or I'm reading this person as androgynous or, transgender. So between what you're expressing and what people read, sometimes there's a disconnect as well.
Okay. Can I just take this opportunity to maybe ask a question on behalf of listeners? Is this a definition, I guess, that's like tomboy might be put under a different umbrella right now, like non-binary or gender non-conforming. Can you just speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah, speak to what non-binary and gender non-conforming really means.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there's a lot of terms to talk about gender talking about gender identity, it's really complex because there's, like I mentioned, there's that internal sense that people have, but you also have your own culture that influences how you view gender, and figuring out how you fit in with all of that can be very complex. And there's more and more terms people are using to describe how they're navigating gender or how they identify. So a non-binary person, starting with that term, would be someone that doesn't identify with what we would call the binary gender system. So people tend to view gender as male or female, cut and dry. There's male and then there's female. A non-binary person would say, no. They might say, I'm kind of both male and female. They might say, I am not male or female. I am a third gender. I'm a fifth, sixth, seventh, whatever gender. So a non-binary person would fall out of those two kind of traditional binary genders of male and female.
And that would probably be the most common place for most people, I would think. Because no one really conforms specifically to all masculine or all feminine ideals. They're all constructs in a way too. So,
yeah, one activity I do is usually with youth, but I think it can work with adults as well, is describe the ultimate male and the ultimate female, and then people can really evaluate like, oh, I don't fit up to all these, and then there's the follow-up question of, well, then are you really male or really female? And so, yeah, no one conforms to everything. And that's where I think the other term you mentioned, gender nonconforming, comes in, where someone, maybe their sense of gender is, say, male, but they don't live up to all the male things. They kind of have this little like feminine piece to themselves, and they might then call themselves gender nonconforming. So they might identify with a binary gender, but it doesn't look the way we would traditionally view one of those binary genders. And so that could be, that could look many different ways. That could be a tomboy, could be someone that's gender nonconforming. Like a drag queen or drag king might be someone that identifies as gender nonconforming, even though being a drag king or queen is a performance or a job, that might also be part of someone's expression of who they are. So it's not necessarily, they might say, well, I don't necessarily conform to what you think is a man or a woman, while still identifying as male or female. And so then non-binary is a little different, where someone would say, yeah, maybe I don't conform to gender because, or I don't conform to male or female because I'm not male or female. So that would be the difference.
Thank you. That's a good distinction. Okay. All right. We've got a few more on the presentation topics-ish.
Yeah, no.
Coming out, okay? Can you
Oh.
speak to that?
Yeah.
All right. So why is coming out such an important discussion to have?
Wow, a lot of things about coming out. I think a lot of my presentations, I do, it's awareness for folks that might not have lived the experience. So in my presentations, there's a lot for LGBTTQ+ people to learn from and experience. But for folks that are heterosexual and or cisgender, they might not have had the coming out experience. So it's really important for those folks to know what a risk it is for people to come out, and also, to give them some tools on how to react. Because even those good intentioned, like, I always knew, that downplays the risk someone takes in coming out to you, and how really it's kind of an honor that someone feels comfortable saying those things to you. So shooting it down with like, I already knew you were gay, I've got the gaydar, or whatever like people think they have, a better approach is really, thank you for sharing that with me. Like, I'm honored that you feel comfortable. And then talking about the risk and safety, those follow-up questions of who else knows? I'm not going to go blurt this on Facebook because that could be dangerous to you. For teachers, it could be, does the class know? How am I going to refer to you in class? Or
Right. Just if I may interrupt to just make sure it's important to say that we should not out anybody else.
Yeah, that would be called outing people, exactly. Yeah, or like your parents or guardians or whoever at home, if I'm writing this letter home, what name am I using? Or if you're coming to the school dance with your partner, like, does your family, like, teachers aren't necessarily going to be calling up families and being like, so-and-so came to the dance with, this other person, but those things can come up in a community. So it's important to be aware that it's not like, oh, you're out of the closet, everything's great now, and like, congratulations, high five, I'm going to go tell the world, and you're probably comfortable with that. Because coming out, it's also an experience that's over and over. You come out to parents, you come out to siblings, you come out to coworkers, you come out to classmates. If you have a sibling and then they're dating someone new, you got to come out to that person. They break up and there's a new person. Who do you tell that person and when? Like, right? Or
And no matter how you
just over and
express
over.
yourself, you don't want anyone assuming anything at the same time. So it's your choice to tell people the information that you wish to present about yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It's your choice when you're ready, what you want people to know. A lot of folks will say, as far as like sexual orientation or sexual attraction, well, that's personal. We don't need to talk about sex. You don't need to go around telling everyone. So yeah, that is a personal decision, but at the same time, yeah, like relationships are important, community is important. So it's not always a sexual thing, but yeah, do you want to talk about home? Do you want to talk about your partner? Do you want to talk about your family? And you may or may not with certain people. For example, yeah, you might want to tell coworkers that you're close with, but maybe there's someone at work that you only see every once in a while. They work on a different project. Do you really want to tell that person? Maybe, maybe not. It's an individual choice. And I think another thing you mentioned that was important is assumptions. You don't want people to assume things about you, so you might want to tell people about your gender or sexual identity. But also an important thing about coming out is that heterosexism and cissexism are the assumption and belief that everyone's heterosexual and cisgender. And so coming out, people have to do it because of those assumptions. So it's a difficult thing to say, I don't want people to assume these things about me, where like a straight person is like, oh, someone's gonna assume I'm straight because that's what we all do. You know, so like their identity by default, they never have to come out, and that's an important thing to acknowledge as well. Cisgender people don't have to say, oh, I identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, I'm good. All right, everybody, you know, like no one has to do that. So that's like an important thing for people to realize as well, that not having to come out is a great gift. Yeah. Like not having to go through that. But then on the same token, for folks that do feel the need to come out, though there are risks associated, there are a lot of potential benefits as well. You know, so not to downplay coming out. I don't want anyone to think like, oh no, you have to do this, it's horrible, it's going to be a bad experience. It can go bad. There are risks, but it can also go well and be a weight off shoulders.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay. Does CIRC do ally training? Could you talk about allies and how to be an effective ally?
Yeah, so actually right now, I think I mentioned kind of I do a lot of 101 and awareness, inclusivity stuff. That all has to do with ally training. Really can just put a different name on it. I would say part of allyship is awareness. You know, it starts there. So having that knowledge, if you're not aware of the issues, you can't take action or change your behavior if you're not educated on things. Right now, in partnership with Assiniboine Community College, I'm doing some allyship trainings there. So I just did one full day training, and we also had Brandon University representative there as well. So the two educational institutions are kind of combining a little bit to have that training for staff. And I've done it other places as well. That's the most recent place that's kind of engaging and kind of doing some ongoing training for their staff. And I also used the word allyship a moment ago, because allyship's an action where ally is an identity. And that's kind of, in my line of work, that's really where the language is shifting and kind of talking about what an ally is. It's more about talking about actions as opposed to identity. So I already mentioned that the awareness, the education's part of it. And that awareness is learning about other people, but it's also learning about yourself. So earlier when we were talking about gender, we have all these outside influences, and you kind of figure out, where am I, you know, in terms of my values, my beliefs, my culture. Same thing with being an ally or participating in allyship. You know, what biases do I have? Am I doing something that might be hurting other people because I'm not thinking about their culture, or my culture kind of does this, I haven't questioned it before. And that's important because you don't necessarily have to leave your culture, you don't have to put your values and beliefs behind, but you can say, this is what I believe, this is what I value. However, my actions, what are going to be most appropriate, what's going to be most helpful if I'm going to be an ally to others. And so navigating your own bias is important. And then actions speak louder than words. How are you acting? So I go into schools a lot, so I will talk to them about all these tips. But then there's like other indicators besides, you know, your kids don't say that's so gay anymore, right? So you got that out of your classrooms. That's a good step. Are there out LGBT staff members at school? Are there role models your students can see? Because, right, do you have policies that are protecting people? You know, that action is going to then draw in people to apply to work there. And if you don't have out people working for you, that says something, you know? So what actions are you taking to then get these results? It's kind of like the joke people use a lot, when talking about allies is, there's the person that always says like, oh, I've got the like one black friend, I'm not racist. Or like, oh, my brother's gay, I totally understand all LGBT people. Think about what does it mean when you only have one friend of a certain group? So being an ally doesn't mean going and making friends superficially to be an ally, but do you really participate with that group? Have you gone to Pride? Are you participating in doing actions? Are you, learning about other people that aren't like you? Are you participating in other cultural events of people that aren't like you? Because then you'll actually be around those people rather than just reading about them like they're a science experiment. So that's anthropology. So that's part of it too.
Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to say about allies?
Allyship. The only other thing I would say about allyship is that it's ongoing, because things change. So like the example earlier I kind of gave for myself being an American, Native American is a term I used in the past, and coming to Canada there's like the term indigenous, but I've learned more about what indigenous means and what's all a part of that, and like the language and why that's important. So that's ongoing for me too. I can't just say, okay, like indigenous is the word and then like use it the rest of my life, because that may change. It's same thing for any group that you would want to ally yourself with.
I think you need to listen a lot.
Yeah.
To keep your ears open and to listen to what the community is saying.
Yeah, totally. So a great example within the LGBT community is right now with what's going on with Black Lives Matter and with the Toronto Pride Parade that happened last year. Black Lives Matter was active at the New York Pride Parade this year. I don't know all the details, but I've recently heard some stuff about that. And there's been a lot of reactions to that, and I think sometimes people aren't listening.
Yes.
They're mad about the action, but it's like, well, what's really happening here? What are these people saying? Like, what's the language they're using? What are their concerns? Like, can you take action to like help with any of these concerns, or are you just ignoring it because the parade was delayed 5 minutes or whatever, Yeah, it takes a lot of active listening, definitely.
Okay. Well, let's move on. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're able to talk a little bit about that. Okay. So when you're giving presentations, what are some of the most common questions that the general public may have?
Yeah, right now I would say people really want to talk about gender a whole lot. I think in the LGBT community it's very broad. There's a lot of different identities. So I don't want to downplay and say people like understand sexual attraction and orientation, because there's still a lot of work to do there. But I think people conceptualize being lesbian, gay, bisexual, even pansexual. People are kind of wrapping their heads around that, where gender people are still kind of confused about the terms, about the experience, and what that all means. So I get a lot of questions about that. And even here in the office, we do have walk-ins that come in. People walk in and ask questions, and there will be people that come in and just say, I want to understand my own gender more. Like, I'm trying to figure it out. Do you have any resources I can read? I just want to explore myself. So people are trying to understand each other, and people are trying to understand themselves right now in terms of gender. So that's like a really big one. And then also recently I've had a few questions, really kind of like the nature-nurture question. People want to know, are you born a certain way, or are you caused to be that a certain way? And there's no definitive science pointing to either.
A lot of different indications that research has pointed to.
Yeah, right?
It's changing. Yeah,
it keeps changing. There's like a research that comes out, and then it like changes, and the research comes out. It's like, oh, it's not quite that, So for me, I tend to personally say it's probably both. And really what we're talking about is like people, dignity, and respect, So it's an interesting thing to dive into and understand why some people want to know that nature or nurture question. But since I can't answer it, I'll just kind of bring it back to that respect, inclusion, and we want to help people. We want to be nice to each other. We want to have a healthy society, So that's where I kind of bring it back to in my presentations. But those are, I would say, the major things I'm hearing right now. And then there's always questions about terminology when I go through like a list with someone. There'll be certain ones. Pansexual, people ask about what that means a lot.
Tell us, please.
Oh, pansexual.
I get that too.
Yeah. So pan means many, where like people might be familiar with the term bisexual, bi meaning two, attracted to two different genders. People will use pansexual to say I'm attracted to many genders, recognizing that there's more than two genders. Though there's plenty of bisexual people that would say, well, yeah, I'm attracted to more than two. I just use the term because more people know it. I've heard people define bisexual as I'm attracted to two genders like mine and genders not like mine, which does cover a lot more than like two genders, right? So when it comes down to it as well, definitions can be personal for people. But again, as we change and start talking about gender differently, other terms are going to pop up, like pansexual. And also, people really don't know about intersex folks. So there's a lot of questions about that. For people that are interested, intersex isn't a sexual attraction or orientation, and it's not a gender identity. It has to do with the body people are born with. And so that's someone whose body isn't what would normally or commonly be referred to as male or female. They might have a combination of sex characteristics or what is called ambiguous genitalia.
Okay. Excellent. That's going to help. I was basically point blank asked by the radio station. Make sure that gets talked about.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about intersex if you want. But.
Well, I think that's good.
Okay.
Okay. Similarly, what do you find to be the biggest challenges or obstacles to education and awareness of issues LGBTQ+?
Well, one issue that is an obstacle, I think, just in sexuality, education in general, is people's sense of what is normal. So even just talking to, about puberty or, when people get attraction, even when people are heterosexual, it's like, what is normal? Is it normal for my body to do this? Is it normal for me to have, like, these sexual dreams? Is this normal? And that's when people go through puberty or different changes or they're feeling different things, it can be a very internal experience. And yeah, you want to know, like, am I okay? Is this normal? So I think that's a normal question to ask. But a word I've heard used is common, and that's like a different way to view it, where people might think it's quote unquote normal to be straight. Where no, it's common to be straight. It's normal to be straight, it's normal to be gay, it's normal to be pansexual. It just might be common. There's maybe just more straight people in the world. So I think that's a barrier for people to kind of get over the idea of normal or even right. There's a right way to be.
Normal is a setting on a dryer.
Yeah, normal is a setting on a dryer. Yeah. My sexuality is high fluff or whatever on the dryer. Yeah, and I think too, a lot of that comes to values and beliefs. And kind of, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, where kind of around allyship or understanding someone that's different than you doesn't mean abandoning values or beliefs. So for people that value like a heterosexual marriage and monogamy and a certain way of sexuality, that's great. Like, those people should value those things. But can they also value human dignity and say, oh, people experience sexuality differently than me, different than what I value, and still see them as people?
That was Jason Fiedler, LGBTQ program facilitator at CERC, the Sexual Education Resource Center here in Brandon, Manitoba. Because they have been so awesome and excel at their job, and there was just so much to talk about. In the meantime, you can contact CERC for more information by calling 204-727-0417. Thanks for listening. I am your host, Jan Egg, and you have been listening to Out on CJ 106 FM.
I don't know what